Before diving into this incredible story, remember to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here, every story has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. The morning sun reflected off the windows of the Everest Corp Tower, illuminating the city with an almost deceptive glow. Emily Johnson, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, walked confidently into the monumental lobby. Each step echoed on the marble, but her heart pounded in her chest. Today was no ordinary day. It was her first day at one of the most prestigious companies in the country, and perhaps the riskiest. As she approached the office of Richard Sterling, the dreaded CEO, she felt the air thicken with an almost palpable tension. Employees watched her with curiosity and a touch of envy. Some whispered about this new recruit who already seemed to be challenging Sterling's imposing aura. Behind the massive door, Richard Sterling, an imposing man with a square jaw and piercing eyes, silently sized her up. His office, decorated in a minimalist yet luxurious style, reflected his personality, cold, calculating, and uncompromising. Without even a smile, he fixed her with his gaze and, in an icy voice, said, "You're not up to the task. I'm firing you." Emily remained motionless, holding her breath, masking the inner turmoil that shook her. In the heavy silence, each second seemed to last an eternity. The employees present averted their eyes, some shocked by the display of a CEO's sheer arrogance toward a new employee. Then, without a word, she gathered her things and left the office, but a faint smile played on her lips. No one yet knew that Emily Johnson wasn't just an employee. She carried within her a secret capable of shaking up the company hierarchy and changing Richard Sterling's life forever. Outside, the city continued on its way, unaware of the impending shock. In a few hours, the powerful CEO would discover that he had just fired his own boss, and that every decision he had made up to this point would be called into question. The next morning, Richard Sterling's office felt colder than ever. His ego had been bruised the day before, and he couldn't understand how he'd been caught off guard by a new employee. He sat down behind his imposing mahogany desk, his hands gripping the leather, ready to assert his authority from the very first moment. Emily Johnson entered calmly, her heels clicking on the floor like a silent countdown. The employees turned to watch, whispering amongst themselves. "Hello, Mr. Sterling," said Emily in a clear, perfectly poised voice. Richard frowned and, in a dry tone, replied, "You shouldn't have come back. Yesterday, I decided you weren't up to the task." A murmur rippled through the room. The employees were stunned. Who had ever seen someone challenge Sterling with such composure? Emily calmly placed her bag on the floor, crossed her arms, and replied, "Apparently, we have information you didn't. I'm here to oversee certain projects that you deemed insignificant. Richard froze. Surprise was written all over his face. His eyes tried to pierce Emily's mask, to understand how a mere recruit could speak like that. But she didn't waver. Her composure was an impenetrable wall. "Very well," Sterling finally said, trying to regain control. "Show me what you can do." Emily smiled slightly and placed a file on the desk. "Start by reading this. You'll understand why I'm here, and why certain decisions need to be corrected immediately." Richard leafed through the file, his eyes widening. Each page revealed mistakes he had made, missed opportunities, ineffective strategies. The humiliation was immediate and devastating. The employees, for their part, began to see Emily in a new light. She was not only competent, she was formidable, and she had just placed Sterling in a position he had never known, that of a learner under her own supervision. Sterling looked up at Emily, realizing with horror that he had just encountered someone who was unafraid of her title or her authority. And that day, the powerful CEO understood a truth he had never considered: first impressions can be terribly misleading, and sometimes, they can change an entire career. Richard Sterling was still seated behind his desk, Emily's file open before him. His hands trembled slightly, which was unusual for a man accustomed to wielding authority. Each page he turned revealed past mistakes, disastrous decisions, and poorly planned strategies. He felt as if his world had just crumbled. Suddenly, his phone vibrated. An incoming call from an unknown number. Richard, suspicious, answered. "Mr. Sterling," said a firm, composed female voice, "please prepare for the 2 p.m. meeting. Your new superior wishes to see you personally." Richard frowned. "My new superior?" "Yes," the voice replied, "and I strongly advise you to be punctual." Before he could answer, the call ended. The CEO felt an icy chill run through him. Part of him refused to believe what was going on. But he had to admit that Emily Johnson was no ordinary employee. At precisely 2 p.m., Emily entered the meeting room. She was wearing a different, more formal suit and a badge Richard had never noticed: Acting President, Everest Corporation. Her calm but penetrating eyes met Richard's, and for the first time, he felt small. "Good morning, Mr. Sterling," said Emily with quiet authority. "I suppose you're wondering why you received this call." Richard remained silent. The heavy silence in the room was almost unbearable. The employees present watched the scene, some stunned, others barely in disbelief. Emily continues. "You fired me yesterday. You thought I was a new recruit with no experience. But as you can see now," she pointed to her badge, "I am your new superior." A nervous laugh escaped Richard, quickly stifled by disbelief. His mind raced. How could he have been so arrogant? How could he have underestimated someone who now held power over him and the company he had run for years? Emily placed a folder on the table, her eyes fixed intensely on Richard. "I advise you to read this before our next meeting. Each page demonstrates the mistakes you have made and the opportunities you have missed. We will correct this together, if you are willing to follow my instructions." Richard took the file, unable to speak. One thing was clear: his professional life had just changed forever, and the man who thought he was the absolute master of the company had just discovered that his greatest lesson was not in business, but in humility. Richard Sterling slammed the file shut, unable to hide his unease. He had always considered himself a master of the company, a genius capable of controlling everything. And yet, facing Emily Johnson, he felt disarmed, vulnerable, almost humiliated. Emily, standing in front of him, looked at him calmly, without aggression, but with an authority that even Sterling could not ignore. "So, Mr. Sterling," she said in a clear voice, "let's start by talking about your decisions on the Horizon project. Your choices cost the company nearly $5 million. Can you explain why you ignored the recommendations of the finance department?" Richard, usually so self-assured, felt trapped. He stammered. "Well, I thought that." Emily raised her hand, firmly interrupting him. "No, Mr. Sterling. I don't want justifications. I want facts. And I want you to understand where you went wrong, so that we can correct it immediately." A heavy silence fell, and Richard realized that every word he uttered could be analyzed, evaluated, judged. For the first time in his career, he felt like an ordinary employee in front of his superior. "Very well," he finally said, his voice low and controlled. "Show me what you're proposing." Emily presented charts, analyses, and alternative strategies with a precision that left Richard speechless. Each point she raised demonstrated not only her competence but also her ability to anticipate problems before they arose. The employees present, silent, watched the scene with a mixture of admiration and astonishment. They had never seen their CEO confronted like this. They had never seen anyone hold Sterling in check with such calm and logic. At the end of the meeting, Richard took a deep breath. The anger he had felt had transformed into a more complex emotion, a mixture of humiliation, respect, and fascination. Emily handed him one last sheet of paper. "Read this tonight. Tomorrow we'll discuss implementation. And remember, here, we work for the company, not for anyone's ego." Richard nodded, unable to speak. That day, he understood a simple but earth-shattering truth: arrogance can be the biggest obstacle to success, and true leadership is often found where it is least expected. The next day, Richard Sterling arrived at the office with a strange feeling, a mixture of nervousness and curiosity. He had spent the night rereading the file Emily had left him, and each page reinforced an idea he still refused to fully acknowledge: he had been outmaneuvered, and Emily was far more competent than he had imagined. Emily was waiting for him in the conference room, impeccably prepared, a detailed agenda in front of her. The employees, silent, sensed that something monumental was about to happen. "Good morning, Mr. Sterling," she said, her gaze firm but without hostility. "Today, we will review the strategic plan and correct some critical errors." Richard nodded, though a feeling of humiliation lingered. He followed her instructions, taking notes and listening attentively. Every point Emily raised was precise, logical, and above all, geared towards the success of the business, not the preservation of her ego. "You see, Richard," Emily continued, "a good leader knows how to recognize their mistakes, listen to others, and adapt. It's not about dominating or imposing your will. It's about making the right decisions, even if they don't come from you." Richard felt a pang in his chest. Never before had he heard such a clear lesson in leadership, and coming from someone he had tried to belittle the day before, the impact was even more brutal. Throughout the day, Emily assigned him complex tasks that he had to oversee under her supervision. Every mistake he made was corrected immediately, not through humiliation, but with methodical and constructive explanations. Richard was beginning to understand that he had always believed he ran a company through fear and intimidation, when true strength lay in intelligence and vision. At the end of the day, Emily spoke to him one last time. "I'm not asking you to change overnight, Richard. But if you want to continue running this company, you need to learn to listen, accept criticism, and work as a team." Richard, silent, nodded slowly. He understood that he had just received a lesson that no business school could teach. This lesson came from someone he had underestimated, and whom he now had to deeply respect. As he left the room, he cast one last glance at Emily, realizing that his position as CEO no longer guaranteed him any privileges in the face of genuine competence. And for the first time in years, he felt ready to learn. The following days were a constant lesson for Richard Sterling. Every decision he made was now scrutinized by Emily, and every mistake, however small, was meticulously corrected. He had always been used to imposing his will, but faced with her, he realized that his authority alone was no longer enough. One morning, Emily entered her office with a slight but confident smile. "Richard, we have a problem with Project Nova," she announced. "Your team has overlooked a crucial detail that could delay the launch." Richard, ready to reprimand his team, felt a pang of frustration. But Emily continued. "Fortunately, I've already prepared a solution. If you follow my recommendations, we can not only meet the deadline, but also improve the final result." He watched her work with calm and control, organizing tasks, redistributing responsibilities, and anticipating every obstacle. Richard felt an unexpected mixture of humiliation and admiration. Every gesture, every decision Emily made demonstrated a skill he had never encountered in his career. Later, in the boardroom, Richard watched Emily explain a complex strategy to the entire team. The employees were captivated, some impressed, others inspired. And Richard understood something he had never realized before: he had never seen a leader inspire respect in this way. After the meeting, he approached her, a little hesitant. "Emily, I have to admit something." Emily looked at him, one eyebrow slightly raised. "Yes? I've never seen anyone run the company like you. You are exceptional." Emily smiled slightly, without arrogance. "Thank you, Richard. But remember, this isn't about being an exception. It's about method, vision, and respect for the people we work with." Richard felt a pang of shame mixed with this admiration. He had been arrogant, impulsive, and overconfident. But now he was beginning to understand that he needed to learn from her, not only for the company, but for himself. That day marked a turning point. Richard Sterling, a powerful and authoritarian man, began to feel a forced admiration for the woman he had tried to belittle. And this admiration, though unexpected, was the first step toward a change he had never thought possible. Richard Sterling could no longer ignore the truth: Emily Johnson was not only his superior, but also a force he couldn't control. Yet his pride refused to submit entirely. He decided to attempt a subtle strategy to regain some power, convinced he could circumvent the situation. The next day, he summoned Emily to his office. "Emily," he began with a calculated smile, "I've been thinking about your strategy for the Nova project. I have a few ideas that I think are better." Emily looked at him calmly, her expression impassive. "Very well, Richard. Share your ideas. I'm curious to see what you propose." Richard presented his suggestions, believing his extensive experience would give him an advantage. But as he progressed, Emily meticulously corrected each point, adding solutions he had never considered and anticipating the consequences of his choices. "Richard," she said gently but firmly, "your idea would have worked in an ideal scenario, but here it would have created major complications for the team and for the deadlines. Do you see now why I proposed this alternative?" Richard remained silent, unable to find a counterargument. Every attempt at manipulation or a show of power failed. The more he tried, the more Emily demonstrated that she controlled not only the company, but also the situation with complete mastery. That afternoon, a team meeting revealed his powerlessness even more clearly. The employees, usually intimidated by Richard, responded with respect and confidence to Emily's directives. Richard felt a dull humiliation but also understood something crucial: Emily was not only an effective leader, she inspired commitment and loyalty, something he had often mistaken for fear and authority. At the end of the day, Richard sat alone in his office, reflecting on his mistakes. For the first time in years, he recognized that his ego could destroy him, and that true power lay in competence, vision, and respect, not in title or seniority. This realization was a shock, but also the beginning of a transformation. Richard began to understand that Emily was not an adversary, she was a teacher, and that he had to learn quickly so as not to remain forever behind her. In the following weeks, Richard Sterling began to change. Every day, Emily Johnson showed him that his old management style, authoritarian, impulsive, and often based on intimidation, no longer had a place in the company. At first, he resisted internally, but little by little, he began to recognize the value of her methods and her vision. One morning, Emily summoned him to the conference room to discuss the company's international expansion. Richard, sitting opposite her, sensed something different this time. He was no longer the undisputed leader. He listened attentively, taking notes and asking pertinent questions. Emily answered each one clearly, transforming challenges into opportunities. "Richard," she said at one point, "I know this may be difficult to accept, but a good leader knows how to recognize the strengths of others and use them wisely. You have valuable experience. Let's learn how to combine your knowledge with my strategies." Richard nodded slowly. For the first time, he felt genuine respect for her, not only for her intelligence, but also for her ability to guide the team with firmness and fairness. He realized that he had spent years confusing authority with leadership, and that Emily embodied exactly what he had always wanted to become but had never known how to be. Later that day, an employee commented on how Emily had handled an internal crisis. Richard, surprised, felt an unexpected surge of pride. Emily was no longer a threat to him, she was an ally, and her success strengthened the entire company, including himself. Their burgeoning respect was also evident in their daily interactions. Richard no longer sought to challenge every decision; on the contrary, he asked questions, learned, and even began to anticipate the solutions Emily would propose. Each time he did so correctly, she would offer a slight smile, as if to acknowledge that he had taken a significant step forward. This development marked a definitive turning point in their relationship. The arrogant and authoritarian CEO had been transformed by the quiet strength and competence of a woman he had tried to belittle. For the first time, he understood that true leadership was not measured by the fear one inspired, but by the respect and trust one knew how to command. Several months had passed since Richard Sterling's encounter with Emily Johnson. The once arrogant and inflexible man had begun to change. His old methods, based on intimidation and control, had given way to listening, reflection, and genuine collaboration with Emily. That morning, an unexpected crisis erupted. A major partnership for the launch of a new product had just collapsed due to a contractual misunderstanding. Employees were panicked, some fearing that this error would cost the company millions. Emily, calm and focused, immediately called an emergency meeting. Richard, sitting beside her, no longer felt the fear or frustration he would have felt before. Instead, he felt a deep respect for her handling of the situation. "Team," Emily began, "we have a problem, but it's not insurmountable. Every challenge is an opportunity to show what we're capable of. Richard, can you coordinate communication with our partners while I restructure the launch plan?" Richard nodded. He had already mentally prepared himself to work under her direction. Instead of feeling humiliated, he felt a newfound curiosity and a desire to learn. Together, they quickly found solutions, anticipated objections, and developed a plan that not only saved the partnership but improved upon the initial project. At the end of the day, Richard found himself reflecting on himself. He no longer needed to prove his superiority through his title or authority. He understood that true leadership lay in the ability to recognize competence, accept advice, and work for the common good. Emily, noticing his change, gave him a knowing look. "You see, Richard? Leadership isn't about ego, but about vision and collaboration." Richard smiled sincerely. For the first time, he felt truly fulfilled in his role, not as an authoritarian CEO, but as a respectful partner to an exceptional leader. That day, he understood that his greatest lesson came not from books or past experiences, but from Emily's humility and strength. Their professional relationship had evolved, from confrontation to respect, from challenge to admiration. And Richard knew that, as long as he followed his teachings, he and the company could reach new heights. Everest Corp had weathered months of turmoil. Thanks to Emily Johnson, projects that had been jeopardized were thriving, and the entire team had regained its confidence and motivation. However, Richard Sterling knew there was one final step: to publicly acknowledge his mistake and definitively demonstrate the respect he owed Emily. A general meeting was held to announce the quarterly results. Intrigued and excited, the employees filled the large conference room. Richard, standing next to Emily, felt a strange nervousness. This was no longer his office, no longer under his control. Emily was the central figure in this presentation, and he would have to support her publicly. When the figures were revealed, record growth, strong partnerships, and renewed motivation, a murmur of surprise rippled through the room. Employees quickly realized that the recent successes were the result of Emily's hard work, not only for her skills but also for her strategic vision and ability to inspire. Richard then spoke, his voice firm but humble. "Today, we celebrate not only our results, but also the leadership and hard work that made this possible. I must admit that I underestimated Emily Johnson from day one. I acted with arrogance and presumption, and I want to publicly acknowledge her essential role in the success of this venture." A respectful silence followed her words, before a thunderous applause filled the room. Emily smiled slightly, a smile filled with satisfaction but without excessive pride. She then spoke. "Thank you, Richard. But I'm not alone. This success is the result of collaboration. When we learn to listen, to recognize the value of each other, and to work together, we can achieve far more than we imagine." The employees cheered, inspired by this demonstration of genuine leadership and mutual respect. Richard felt a new warmth in his chest. Not only had he learned a valuable lesson, but he had also earned the trust and sincere respect of his team. That day, the dynamics of the company changed forever. Richard understood that humility and gratitude were not weaknesses, but strengths, and that Emily Johnson was not only his superior, but also a role model for him and all employees. In the following months, Everest Corp experienced a period of unprecedented prosperity. Every department functioned in perfect synergy, employees were motivated, and the company culture had radically changed. The once arrogant CEO, Richard Sterling, had fully embraced the lessons Emily Johnson had taught him. That morning, Richard entered Emily's office with a strange feeling, a deep and sincere gratitude. He was no longer the one who imposed his decisions at all costs, but a respectful collaborator, aware that their success came from a common effort and genuine leadership. "Emily," he said with a humble smile, "I wanted to thank you for everything. For your patience, your perseverance, and for showing me what it truly means to lead." Emily looked at him with that quiet calm that had so impressed the employees since day one. "Richard, you've done the hardest part, you've agreed to learn and change. That's what distinguishes a true leader from a mere manager. At that moment, the two understood that their dynamic had evolved beyond the classic hierarchies. There was now a true collaboration, based on respect, mutual admiration, and a shared vision. In the large conference room, the employees applauded the duo when they announced an ambitious new project. All eyes turned to Emily, respectful and firm, but also to Richard, who had transformed, more thoughtful, more humble, and above all, ready to learn from others, even those more competent. The road had been difficult, marked by humiliations, confrontations, and doubts. But through each challenge, one truth had become clear: competence and respect always prevail over arrogance and ego. And so, Everest Corp began a new chapter. Emily Johnson led with wisdom and firmness, Richard Sterling collaborated with humility and commitment, and together they built a company where true leadership and success went hand in hand. This new beginning symbolized much more than just professional success. It was proof that learning, humility, and respect could transform not only a career, but an entire life.